The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the official positions of the sponsors, advertisers, or presenters. Advertising does not imply endorsement by the sponsors and presenters.
Welcome to the Lighting Controls Podcast, everyone. Hopefully you're ready for an awesome conversation. We have a really cool conversation lined up this time with Coffield and Rob from Canon Design. They are, bringing two perspectives to the conversation, one of design, one of engineering. Really interesting stuff they've got for us today. But before we get into it, just wanted to let you know that this podcast is presented by the Lighting Controls Association, LCA, and is financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, or NAILD. And if you haven't checked out our website, you should go to lightingcontrolspodcast.com, check out previous episodes, any news updates in the industry, and if you want to check out some cool merch like this t-shirt or this mug over here, there's a link in that website to check it out. So otherwise, here's Rob and Coffield. All right, welcome back to the Lighting Controls Podcast, everyone, where we just love to talk about the lighting controls, and that's about it. But today we've got two great guests, Coffield and Rob. Coffield and Rob, do you mind just giving us a quick breakdown on who you are, what you do? We'll start with Rob, and then we'll go to Coffield.
Hi, sure. I am the electrical engineering leader for the Buffalo office for Canon Design. My degree is in electrical engineering, and I also help them with project management type tasks for Canon.
Great. And Coffield?
Yeah, sure. I'm Coffield King. I was supposed to be an architect, but I ended up in lighting due to playing too many video games and some other interesting clients I had in the architecture side. I've been with Canon 5 years now, working out of the Boston office, but most of my projects are not in Boston. Working as the lighting designer for our lighting design studio, and have the pleasure of having electrical and all the other engineering disciplines at the firm. So I cause Rob a lot of headaches.
Well, thank you both for joining us here. I think one of the interesting things about what you hit on there, Coffield, is the fact that you have a lot of different trades and responsibilities all under one umbrella, all under the same roof, essentially. And so that's something that, we really haven't spoken to a lot of people yet about on this podcast. So, getting your perspective on that all in one approach, as opposed to having these disparate little boutique firms working together, might be interesting to hear about that. But also, you guys do great stuff. Be great to hear about the projects that you get involved in as well.
Sure. So it is a different sort of lighting and electrical world than what I was in before, where, as a lighting consultant previously, always working with outside engineers, always being kind of hitting that scope gap where it's like, who's doing the lighting controls? But now it's different because we have both sides of the scope and we have to figure out who's going to do the lighting controls still. So, it's still not perfectly straightforward, but I think what we're doing is better than what I had done before as, an outside lighting consultant.
So because you aren't really an engineer, you're, like you said, you started in the architectural side of things. It's good to have that in-house engineer like Rob to support you and make sure that everything is to a quality that can be stamped, so that there's not as much coordination going on between that. Does that sound about right, Rob?
Yeah, it definitely does. And, it comes down to the division of scope, like Coffield pointed out, and like some of the previous podcasts that you guys have had referred to, controls is getting more difficult, and energy savings are more to the forefront, and everyone's trying to, get the smart building, right? So, and we've taken that smart building idea and turned it into a service that we've started to initiate throughout the firm, where we're bringing in an integration team now in the beginning
Mhm.
of uh, design development and schematic design phases to make sure that there's proper monies in the budget to be allocated toward, the different requirements that the owners have, and certainly through commissioning, like you've talked about on other casts, and different abilities that we have here. At our firm, where we can start to put those people in place so that the lighting controls, and in turn, the building automation system and all of the systems that communicate, um, are able to, be achieved, and really do start to produce the results that we're all hoping for, and
Right.
probably have been hoping for a lot of years, honestly.
For
So.
sure. Yeah, I mean, and so when you say integration team, are you saying you have an in-house integration team involved in the project from the beginning?
No, it's a design integration team, right? So the first thing I think you find out when you start to poke around in this space is that integration is used in a whole different type of ways, right? So, there's integrators that are,
Mhm.
in my mind, and always, probably will be, were the people that were on site getting the actual programming done, communicating with the audio visual systems, sending information to security systems, all the different protocols that need to be, looked at and figured out, and how those are going to communicate. The integration design team that we have started is a visioning team that sets the use case goals for the different projects, to make sure that the specifications can be written in a way that the engineers understand the goals, the owners understand the goals, and the construction managers understand the goals of the project. So it isn't a surprise at the end that an integrator needs to be involved.
Mhm.
The site integrator needs to be involved from the beginning of construction, and really an integral part of the commissioning process, in our opinion, as well. So.
Yeah, so I mean, you're designing the integration in the project so that you can hand it off to someone like Ron here to be able to take on the integration responsibilities as the contractor. So that way, there's almost an integration of the design itself to the construction.
Exactly. And you're also allowing the owner to set the goals as to what they want to have. So a prime
Mhm.
example, like a project Cofield and I are working on, it's a 4 building complex, a lot of R&D, a lot of office space, and some retail. And we came up with use case goals for all of the different buildings. And one of the integration use cases that we came up with was the ability for someone, if it was their birthday, to be able to have a specific color light in their office, right? So
Mm.
the whole tower would be, all blue, and then when it's their birthday, it would be green, or so that programming and integration that we're looking for, like, that's taken to the next level. We had a lot of discussions about VIP entrances, right? Like, can the
Mm.
lights change when the VIP comes in? Can we let them be notified when their car charging is done? Like, any of the things you would want a VIP person to have. And what we're actually finding, or what we set out to find in our Buffalo office project, which was we were able to control because we were both the owner and the engineer and the architect. We were everybody in the process except for the construction team, right? So
Mhm.
easy to get approval on
Yeah,
the
for
budget.
sure.
So so we went POE lighting, and we went full, thermal occupancy sensors, and occupancy counting, and we integrated it with the building automation system. And we were able to achieve a mapping integration through the POE lighting control system that gave us the ability to be more efficient as an office, right? So that was our use case. And that efficiency was a map system that shows when the conference rooms are utilized, and you can sit at your desk, and through Outlook, the integration between Outlook, the PoE lighting, the building automation system, it all communicates to the point where you're going to be able to see if somebody's in that room, not a specific person, but somebody's occupying the room, so you can't take it. If you take a scheduled meeting at 3 o'clock and somebody tries to take that same meeting, Outlook doesn't allow you to do that. The map shows you somebody's in the room and occupied. So because our office, we're like 300 people in Buffalo, walking around to find the conference room that's open can take you 20 minutes. So if, the calculation was, if you did that 50 times a day, how much, time could you save and efficiency?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I think it really speaks to, the target of the use case to say, not only can we utilize the lighting control system to be able to save you time, but we can also save you costs, right? So it's
No,
it's
that's
speaking
awesome
to the
stuff.
funding of those projects, right? Speaking
Yeah,
of the
for
funding
sure.
of those projects, payback.
And so now, with Rob doing all of this work, Coffield, what is it that you do on top of that?
I mean, we were right in the mix on that last one. He was talking about, the coming up with these use case scenarios, and
Mm-hmm.
them like, do you really want colored lights everywhere? Are we doing this? I mean, are we going full media facade? And
Mm-hmm.
like, do you understand that the number of light fixtures that we need to do this is different? Because it's not just 10 foot on center and you're good to go. Like, if you want the building to be fully responsive and react, like, that's a whole different lighting design than
Mm-hmm.
just hitting your target foot candles. So it's one thing to say, yeah, we're going to do it, and then it's a whole different thing to actually get that design in
Right.
place, which is what we're doing now. And then it becomes even more. It's like, now we got to design ceilings that go with
Mm-hmm.
this system. It doesn't just stop at the sensors and the fixtures. It's a lot more involved when you have living building
Right.
that's tracking things. So,
Right. And so
Mhm.
the relationship I'm seeing here is very much like architect and engineer. You're giving the design guidance and the overall scope, whereas Rob is doing the nuts and bolts, making sure that everything is going to functionally work. Is that an accurate metaphor?
yeah, I'm not supposed to circuit anything, but every now and then it might have. It never happens. I never circuit. So, in theory, that's the kind of the line, but in reality, it's once you get our teams mixed, and I don't know if you fully explain. So Canon is architecture and engineering, but we also have facilities optimization services. So we have
Mhm.
commissioning, we have everything, including a whole lot of planning. That's
Mhm.
probably one of our biggest service lines, is the planning that happens before it even gets to schematic design. So
Sure.
it's the full gamut of what
Yeah, I mean
could be
you're
done.
basically from the ground up part of the project, and what the IES would actually define commissioning to be, which is from the beginning to the end, following through, making sure that what was discussed at the beginning of what the owner said they wanted is what they got. And so, commissioning in lighting industries utilization means more programming and the installation verification, but ultimately you do provide that service as well.
Yeah, it does vary. I mean, we've got the really large projects. We've got down to a single esports room, like that is the range of
Yeah.
the project. So it's still a wide variety.
Mm-hmm.
But at least for the lighting studio, it's interesting because we don't actually go after lighting prime work outside of Canon. We're just too busy trying to cover everything that Canon is doing. Mm-hmm. And so
Sure.
it's not. It's more of a. I don't know if Rob has the same idea, but when there's a problem, then they'll come get us and pull us in. on certain projects of certain sizes. Other projects were there from the whole way,
Yeah.
from the start to finish, like you're saying, with
Yeah.
commissioning. But it does vary. So, I mean, in a perfect world, I think we would have enough time to be on the project from the start to the finish. But often we are on it and off of it as required.
Well, and I think that, the majority of the people we've interviewed, that's the case. I mean, ideally, everyone will be involved at the beginning of the project and be able to follow through the whole way. But in reality, you get bits and pieces sometimes, and that's just how it goes in our industry right now, which is, I think it's unfortunate. But as far as your scope goes, though, I would say it's unique to be a part of the OPR design as opposed to just being handed an OPR.
There's a lot of opportunities of collaboration there, right? And I think that when it doesn't have to be, so we do also hire a lot of consultants to help us when we notice that there's gaps in the project scope, right? So the first thing that we're allowed to do when we're in a multifaceted firm is that we're able to look at all the proposals together and fill in the holes, and what's been interesting is to be able to reach out to, Coffield and say, look at, like, what were you thinking here? We can have site engineers that can say, hey, like, how did you want the lighting to be? Because, he's put a sequence of operation down. We've done all of our drawings and made sure that, we try to be able to clearly define the lighting design scope and the programming. But then, you get to site and the contractor's like, what do you want to do here? It's always, like, back to level zero. Like, all of a sudden nobody knows, that there was a sequence of operations. So it's good to be able to reach back to Coffield and say, like, hey, what was the thought process? And that doesn't take him being involved on a day-to-day basis throughout the project, the building portion of the project. So it's good to spot check, like that.
No, for sure. I can see where that would be a benefit. And just to rewind a little bit on something that you said, I don't know if all of our listeners are familiar with the proposal process for a project, but what you're saying is that when an RFP or request for proposal comes out, you kind of scoop up as much as you can for that, so that you have it all under one roof. And that way you can identify where the gaps in that scope is and delineate and say, oh, well, you actually need somebody else to do this thing that was never captured in the RFP. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it is. And I'll say the number one thing that we've had issue with, or I've had issue with on the lighting controls end of it, is the integrator. Because there's a very gray line between, you can write a specification, and now a couple of the times I think you guys touched on Division 25, but that has become a section of specs that we've been developing more, because it really is the only way to be able to communicate to the contractors what the programming and integration needs to be moving forward throughout the process. And it's become, in my opinion, a lot like a commissioning spec, where it almost requires a weekly or bi-weekly meeting to be able to make sure that the integration is getting done in a timely manner. So that's all outlined in the Division 25s that we've been issuing. But the challenge has been, on the first project, we had the mechanical contractor grab 25 and say they had it covered. And we went and looked for the integration, and we were like, Coffield and I were laughing about this yesterday, or today, actually, in the morning. We were like, no, they didn't do anything, right? Like, they said they were going to do it, but nobody's actually integrating anything, So, like, now we're like, okay, now we have nothing. We're 8 months into construction and nothing's been done. What do we do? On projects of old, when I would specify integration, I would basically end up doing it myself. I would call everybody in the meeting and be like, okay, who's the AV guy? Who's the, building fire alarm, electrical engineer, or electrical foreman? Bring him in. Like, how are we going to figure out how these systems communicate? And we're really excited about seeing, integrators being introduced into the market and being able to help us, almost as a partnership to get into the next level of these building systems and lighting control systems.
And so, what do you do when a contractor has missed that integration section that you've created?
So the process that it took a lot of meetings, right? So we called meetings, right? What does everybody do nowadays, right? Call a Zoom meeting and say, all right, what do we let's talk about the Zoom meeting before. But it really comes down to, I think, we hold the construction manager accountable, and we say, look, these were the steps that we put forward. I mean, on a couple of projects, we've had integration division 25 drawing sets, which have been just block diagrams of showing how the systems communicate. The POE one was really good because it was a different, it used the POE system as the backbone of the integration, which I'm not sure that is the future, but like that was something we were able to achieve with that project. So yeah, it really comes down to showing them that it was in the contract, and we eventually ended up hiring a third party integrator that had to write some graphic user interface programs to be able to bridge the gaps between the systems that we needed to communicate. So eventually you get it, but it takes
Now,
perseverance.
little unknown backstory about Ron and I. That's how we met. I had written an integration spec, and the electrical contractor did not read it and just defaulted to their go-to integrator, which was Port Lighting at the time. And I was like, I don't have any issue with Port Lighting, but I didn't list them as one of the acceptable integrators in my spec. And after a period of time, it was just sort of like, look, you know what, that's okay. We'll work with Port. And I interviewed Ron, and we got to know each other, and that's how we met. But it is a real point of frustration when you've spent all this time working on this spec and detailing out everything you need for this integration to be successful, and for it to just completely be ignored it's really frustrating.
He really didn't like me when we started. I was just this guy. Like, here I was. That's true. But it's funny, so you mentioned the word partnership. And as an integrator, maybe not everyone feels the same, but I truly feel as an integrator on a job site that we are there to be partners with everybody, the GC, the owner, the EC, right, through everyone, because AV, we all have to work together to, make sure that everything does communicate. And you can have the best documents in the world, but all it takes is them to change one fixture type on you or change one little thing. And now all of a sudden there's this piece that's now missing, right? Now this fixture is not 0 to 10, it's this, or it was DMX and now it's 0 to 10 or something silly. So it really does take somebody that's going to sort of own all that to really iron out all the details post bid and see what did the contractors actually buy and what are we really getting into to make sure it all comes together.
Well, and imagine that makes your job all the more easier again, Coffield, having somebody take that ownership of the integration design and say, okay, we're vetting all of this. That way you can really focus on, what is the ultimate goal? How are these, what is the end use experience for this?
It's gone both ways, or all ways, I guess. I mean, there's been some great ones, and then there's been some where it's like, oh, well, you bought a package and you didn't coordinate the controls with the lighting package, but you went ahead and got a GMP for it. So, at that point, it's always a little interesting. So yeah.
I just want you to elaborate a little bit on that. So ultimately, GMP is basically where they're trying to shoot for the lowest price that's being offered to them. And what you're saying is that even though you did the best you could to design an airtight project because of the dynamics of GMP, that they kind of mixed and matched and ended up with an uncoordinated system. Is that correct?
Sure. So again, different projects happen with different parameters. But
Mhm.
the problem with the GMP is oftentimes if you've got more information, like if you really have all the info there in your spec and in your sequence of operations, and we've got every space type with every scenario we want, but then it's they need a GMP and they say, okay, well, we're just going to give it whatever $2.99 a square foot for controls, and it's like, but I have all this info, and they're like, well, yeah, but that's too much for me to read before bids due tomorrow. So that guessing that's $2.99, and it's like, all right, fine. So if I had just done less, and we've done this where I just said, listen, what we are planning for is we're going to go ahead and give you the number we want. We want it to be $4.99 or whatever.
Sure. So I mean, it can be a challenge to try and find that perfect balance between the amount of work and the reward you get for that amount of work.
Yeah, but I do feel that if so, not all of our projects, are completely integrated. So often we do end up with an outside electrical engineer for various reasons. But I feel so much more comfortable when I have the full Canon electrical specs to back me up than I do when I have an unknown spec from a different firm that I haven't, worked with the engineer on. So like I can, if wanted, I am welcome to help edit Canon specs. Like the electrical engineers are not keeping the lighting people out of them. If anything, they're trying to get us to come help edit actively. And so that's kind of, I guess, the line for me right now is if I've got the Canon specs backing me up, then I know I can point to things and be like, look, you got to do what's in the spec.
Right. Whereas if you're just the lighting designer and you're not actually writing division specs, then you're kind of at the mercy of whoever is providing those and whether they are coordinating with what you're putting in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can totally see that how that dynamic would really benefit you if you had everything in-house and are able to really verify all of that way ahead of any projects that may even come down the road. Because, everybody has a boilerplate spec document that they start from for a project. But, it's really a high quality design to edit those specs per the project's needs. And if your engineer is not familiar with your design process, they might not realize that they need a supporting spec document for something.
Yeah.
And additionally, it sounds like with the Division 25 stuff that you've been doing, there's a lot of good stuff there where you do have a fully integrated system.
It's constant work in progress, I would say.
Yeah. It is.
Appreciate
and there's
your
a lot
honesty.
of education. There's a lot of education that goes into it, right? And I think that what we're learning over the past couple of years was, I mean, I liken the integrator. I've done it a couple of times already, but I feel like the integrator is almost the same as a commissioning agent, because it is, to me, somebody that is really helping the owner get what they achieve, and it doesn't necessarily need to be a contractor. It should be someone that they partner with, and some of the larger hospitality ownerships that I've done work for, they have integrators on staff, right? Like a few of the Hard Rock facilities that I've done work in, like they have 2 or 3 integrators that have been there for years, and they've been running the lighting shows and doing all the lighting control. And I found a couple guys where they had 4 or 5 different lighting control systems mocked up in like a couple racks, that were like, it was like old, Color Kinetics iPlayers and Traxon EQs and a whole bunch of stuff just wired up. And they're like, we don't really like Traxon, or not to use specific manufacturer names. Sorry if I do that.
That's
but
okay.
It's that we don't like that protocol, right? Like that one, can you specify this, because we really like to we like this user interface, and we like to we can do the Phillips programming or whatever. So it's interesting to see how some owners get deep into the requirements that they have.
Well, and I think that points to the topic that we dance around all the time, which is the fact that the term integrator really is a catch-all. It doesn't really point to one specific capability. It really, if you have an in-house integrator, it could be to that level, whereas an in-house integrator for a BMS might be somebody who is monitoring the data and managing that data, but not actually putting their hands on any equipment. So I think there's a lot to be said about the fact that this term we use regularly doesn't really have a core definition.
Yeah,
And
I
so
feel like
again, that's
Go ahead, Coffield.
Go, Rob.
I was going to say that speaks to the education that we need to do, as an industry, and everyone, everyone's been talking about it on all the different episodes, but it's contractors probably right away. One joke we've made for a while, and this is definitely a lighting controls joke, is like, I keep saying we got charged for power cable and connections for our PoE lighting system. Like 120 volt connections to the fixtures. That the one contractor, priced that out, and I called him up, and I go, you realize this is the whole thing with this. You don't, but it's that simple, right? Like, and that was like 200 grand worth of work. And right there, they were like, well, that changes our entire bid, just by the different knowledge they had of the control system. So.
Right. And I think, that also points to where integrators fall into play. If your contractor's savvy and knows that they need to grab an integrator for their bid process, they will. And give credit to the electrical contractor that tapped Ron before they read my spec. They knew they needed an integrator for the project. They just didn't realize that there was a spec already detailing out integrators' responsibilities. But they knew enough to at least get the right people involved. And so, to your argument, the contractor that missed the fact that it was a PoE system didn't necessarily realize, oh, I need to grab somebody who understands PoE systems and be involved in this bid.
Exactly.
Yeah,
but so I'm, go ahead.
I mean, I think that it's even like the PoE is a big one, right? But on a slightly smaller scale, current project where we had spec'd all the fixtures to be low voltage in all the standard classrooms so that it was, easier for everything to be wired up. And then someone changed the ceiling grid, which meant the fixtures didn't fit. So then suddenly they had to be 120, wired. And then that turned into a $700,000 change order to do all the new wiring. But I was like, well, then they're like, no, we're not paying this. I was like, yeah, then just use what we already told you to use and use the low voltage. That way you don't have this giant ad. And they're like, okay, fine. Yeah, we could do that. And it's like the thinking through of that system is it's not happening. The decision making on the cost of it is not always followed through. I mean, it's the worst with, coves and things where it's like, yeah, we'll get a cheaper fixture. It's like, okay, but now you have to build all of this architectural stuff.
Right.
You got a $50 a foot fixture where before we had a $200 a foot fixture, but it did everything. It was the finished product. And now you've got this cheaper thing. Somebody decided that was the number that we had to deal with, and then didn't follow through the ramifications in terms of constructability.
And so what you're saying, what I would refer to as a cove in a box type fixture, where you have all of the architectural elements scooping around the light and making sure that it's nice and clean. Whereas you'd have a cove fixture, which is meant to be mounted in an architectural cove that completely covers the fixture. And so, yeah, I mean, taking that and applying it to the lighting controls and the PoE system, it's the same thing. You know, you've got similar applications, but there's widely different cost differences between the two.
Yeah.
And so, you know, additionally, going back to that definitional part of integrator, you know, you kind of need to define it every single time you're doing a design that you're involving an integrator in, because of the fact that there's no set definition. You know, I can say electrical contractor, and for the most part, that's consistent for a project. But if I say integrator, it could be a systems integrator, it could be an integrator designer, it could be, you know, this person who maintains the facility that calls themselves an integrator but isn't really an integrator. You know, there's a lot of work that you guys need to do up front to make sure that it's well defined, the parameters are well defined, and that scope is well defined.
Yeah, Rob, stop me if I'm crazy here, but I can't just rattle off a list of good integrators. You know, like it's not like I know offhand, because we work in a lot of different markets around the world. So it's like, hey, we've got this project in California. It needs an integrator. I have no good resource on how to track one down other than asking reps and like, hey, who's good in this market?
Right.
And that's it. And I mean,
you know, getting feedback from other groups, you know, I think it's one of the things is people don't identify themselves as integrators, even though they really are technically integrators. You know, a lot of people will identify as dealers, for instance, but they won't say, oh, we're an integrator. But you still do integration work. And so that was one of the things, talking to Craig DeLuey, who works with the Lighting Controls Association. Basically, they do like a poll, and they have a question that says, are you an integrator? And you can check it off if you are. They don't get very many people who check that. And it's really surprising to hear that. Because you would think...
And I was going to say, on a couple of projects that we had hired integrators recently as well, the state contract work requires you not to have the same integrator on the design as the bid of the project, right? So a lot of the integrators were kind of walking away saying, well, I want to provide all the equipment, so I don't really want to help on the design end of things because I want a shot at the bid. So that's also limiting the amount of people that can be involved. So it's definitely, it seems like it's a growing field though, and I think that the owners are getting educated and starting to get interested in, you know, like we started with our Buffalo office project, is like, what's the payback, right? Because it's really simple to explain to them, hey, the payback is your lighting control system is going to work, and we're going to verify that it was installed correctly. And, you know, the worst thing is that, you know, I tell a lot of the young engineers, and I say, you know, go through the lighting control system when you do the punch list as the engineer. And if you find one that's completely fully set up and working, you let me know, but I haven't found one in 20 years. So, right. So it always goes on our punch list: finish the lighting control system, give the owner training, right? Like that's a standard punch list item. And I mean, I still to this day have not really had a project that I could walk away from and say that is completely done. It's kind of, it's not depressing. Let's not say depressing, but it's what are we supposed to say? We're supposed to say it's an opportunity for success in the future. Let's say that.
I think I did have one. That one I mentioned, the esports room. Like, we got that one nailed.
Okay.
It was great.
Good.
But I mean, that was such a weird thing. You know, like when somebody comes to you and says, I want the room to go nuts and then switch to the team's color who wins, like right when they win. And it was like, okay, that's sweet. And, you know, because it was like such a different thing. It wasn't just like, hey, we've got architectural lighting, it's got some tuning, we got some RGB. This was like, no, we need the room to like have a mode for each of the different types of games that the kids want to do in here because we're trying to draw more kids into this program. And it was just, it was the most fun sequence of operations I've ever gotten to write. Hands down.
Yep. I will try to defend integrators for at least a half a second. I will say it's not always our fault that the system isn't 100%. Right? So like there are plenty of times when you get on site and you're like, oh, hey, this thing's changed, and a lot of it depends on when the integrator is brought into the project, right? There are far too often, as I'm sure you guys have seen, where the integrator is brought in at the last minute, and it's after everything's already been sold, 90% of the equipment's installed, the integrator gets there, and now all of a sudden, there's not a wire between A and B. Well, someone needs to run that wire, but the drywall's done, and this and that, and then everyone starts pointing fingers. No one wants to own it. And as an integrator, I'm not doing it. I'm not running that wire, right? Someone has to do it. So there are times where I physically can't finish the system, or I can't make this one aspect work because someone else didn't do something, or it wasn't documented, or, right? There's always a million reasons. So I will say it's not always the integrator's fault that things aren't 100% at the end of the day on a project. But it, back to your point about education and people identifying as integrators. We were at Leducation a couple weeks ago, and when I registered for Leducation, integrator is not even an option for registration at Leducation, which I thought was interesting. Dealer was and stuff, but integrator wasn't even listed anywhere. So it really does all. I think at the end of the day, a lot of this comes back to education, the Division 25 having those specifications, and that's where things will hopefully start to change.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it's on that point also, lighting controls designer is also a growing term that's not as well recognized or defined. So, but I think as far as things go, in your bio, Rob, you do identify as an integrator. So I'm just curious, what that definition means to you.
So that's the thing. So to me, that means we're design integration. We're setting your use case goals at the beginning of the project, so that, like Coffield pointed out, the GMP includes that sum of money that that you're going to need to achieve those integrations, and it's a bit of the Wild West right now to be able to come up with budgets that we can stick to, because it can get into a lot of user interface work that we found that is something that the owner may not be interested in spending additional monies on. So it's calculating the paybacks, and it's defining exactly what the integration is for the design. And then, because I always bring it back to when I talk with Paul Condrat, who's the engineering leader for Canon, and I just keep saying, Paul, we need to set these goals, because nobody ever set goals like this before. Nobody knows we need it, but they know we need it, but they don't know we need it until we show them that this is the way to actually achieve what they want in the end. And we're really starting from the ground up with some of the clients, but they're very receptive to it, because they've all been part of these processes many times. And especially our healthcare industry, they can see a lot of efficiencies in the lighting control system being integral to the safety, the security of the patients and the patient experience. So it's adding into, and then you add the circadian rhythm lighting stuff that that Coffield did at the Buffalo office as well. And like, now you're actually talking about changing the way that people perceive the space and live in the space, and it's all under the same time clock, which has always been one of our goals. So I think that would be why I would say that. And I thought about it when I wrote that, because I was like, can I really say this at this point? I mean, we've done 3 or 4 visioning projects, and for one of them, we're going into the next phase of implementation. So we're interested to see, how that's going to work out.
Well, so you know, I think that that's really interesting to hear, because going back to a conversation we just recently had with somebody who defined themselves as a lighting controls designer, that's pretty close to what they define themselves as doing. And so I think, again, there's this interesting amorphous definition that's being developed, and it's almost like there's a decision being made whether it's just lighting controls or if it's a more holistic aspect to the world. Maybe we should redefine the name of this podcast, not the lighting controls podcast, but the integrations podcast.
So the reason you're
It's
not going to be able to do that, if you I actually thought about that, not that you would change it to that, but how do you do this, right? Like, so the problem that we really have here, and I'm probably not going to make a lot of friends when I say this, is that the building automation system has monopolized this market for so long, and they
Yeah.
have it in every building owner's head that it costs $1,000 to program a single IP address, whether it be a sensor or any type of building automation system appliance. And I sometimes I know this sounds super nerdy, but I sit there and I go, how did we get to this point where people believe that it's $1,000 for that service per point? Like, and that is a common thing that gets said in many engineering firms that I've been part of. It's basically commonplace that and then you have the sponsor that you guys have that kind of is going against them. And what we had thought about doing on a couple projects, which we haven't done yet, is we're going to take the building automation system right out of the Division 23 and we're going to put it in 25. Right. So now it actually becomes a Division 25 contractor that's not only doing the lighting programming and the metering system programming and the power system programming, but also doing the building automation system. Right. So now you've taken that out of the big building automation systems providers' scope of work and forced them to be under the same roof as all the other integrations. So that's the idea we have, but we haven't done it yet on a project.
So I'm just curious, if you did that, right, and you put everything under 25, would your intent be to have one company actually provide all of those services? Because I can't imagine there's many companies who would be able to provide all those various types of integration services.
No, so the most recent project we had, the building automation system actually became their own bid and not under the mechanical contractor, right? So they were able to be part of the project team, which was really effective, right? Because they're not under a contractor trying to get answers to the team. They're part of the team meetings. They're part of the communication that we've had, and they're going, hey, we can save some controls costs, right? Which is really not a commonplace. So as well as the integration stuff, I also do project engineering management for MEP trades as well, and then project management for architectural too once in a while if it's a smaller architectural project. But what I see in that space is that there's just a lack of understanding during the bid process. So $1,000 a point adds up real quick, right? The building automation system spec is kind of loose. Yeah, what is it, 30 grand? All of a sudden it's 100 grand, and you're like, what? Your mechanical budget's way off. So it's given us a way to actually bring that cost to the forefront and allow the owners to partner up with the building automation systems. We're feeling like it's going to go toward a space of both, integrator, right? Like, and you may have a lighting controls sub, you may have a building automation sub, you may have a security system sub, AV sub, and you're managing, what we say, herding the cats on site, right? Like you're trying to figure out what all these different programmers are doing, and that's again why I bring it to commissioning, because that's what the commissioning process is. They're bringing all the contractors together and they're saying, okay guys, when's this going to start up, right? When are we going to test the first pump? When are we going to do that? I see the integrator being the same type of leader to say, when are we going to test the occupancy sensors on floor 8? Nobody programmed them. Nothing's been done. who's gonna show us that this building's communicating correctly? When are we gonna have the building automation system points available? When are the graphics going to be available? Because we all know it gets left to the very end of the process, and the contractors are ready to demobilize, and they're going to try to squeeze it into the last 3 days while everybody's trying to do punch list items, and that it seems like that's how we end up with some of the systems we've had.
Yeah, so
whether we put it on the punch list or not.
Yeah, so that's an interesting take. I had never really considered that. So you're really looking at sort of that Division 25 as not necessarily the integrator spec, but like you said, as a commissioning spec, and you want that person or that entity, that company, to then take care of every part of the integration, the lighting integration, the AV integration, the BMS. And like you said, if they have to sub in all those contractors, but you want one person or one organization to essentially oversee that entire process. And that's what you're trying to do with your Division 25 specs?
Exactly.
Okay.
And we're trying to get the construction managers to understand that there's time for that, right? And you could even make it part of the commissioning meeting if you wanted to, right? It wouldn't be that far of a stretch. It's mostly the same contractors, but it's definitely a heightened requirement, and we're interested to see how it's going to be received. I think I'm going to get some pushback from the building automation system people, because they want to live.
I think one of the things about building automation, though, is that they've had such a hard time taking the lighting controls territory. You see this all the time where these big name companies that are building automation specific, they try to scoop up that lighting scope by either buying a company that's got lighting controls or by merging or doing something, and it always fails. And so I'm just curious if you have any perspective on why that is.
I don't know. I would say that because it's the R&D that the main 3 or 4 lighting controls manufacturers have done to be able to optimize those systems, and they're not really selling that technology, right? They're keeping that to themselves, and the purchases that have been made were systems that didn't really seem like they were going to go the distance to not put it a little bit dull and not name specific manufacturers, but it seems like you didn't really buy the Cadillac, right? You may be the Cadillac building automation system, but you're really giving us something that it does not meet the standard of lighting controls today. And I love the conversation that you guys had at the beginning here about the simplicity of the controls, because we always get, I think, Coffield, everyone's like, oh, I want the lighting controls to be simple, but then I want it to do like these 20 things, right? It's like, well, that's not simple though, right? It's actually,
I want it to be standalone. We wanted everything to be standalone too. But
yeah.
That just means unhook a wire. It doesn't help you. It's not going to save you cost. It's like simple. Yeah, everybody asks for simple, but
and I guess that's another definitional difference is what is simple.
Yeah.
So
is simple 6 switches in a row, or is it one simple keypad interface? That's that gets real argumentative in user groups too. I mean, we're mocking up. We do these mock-ups of patient rooms, and you start out with a switch, stuck to the location, and by the end of it, you got 16 switches in one patient room, because everybody wanted, I need to reach it here. When I'm doing this procedure, I need right here. And they stick another one, and we end up with 16, and it's just like, oh man.
And that's not what I would define as simple. That sounds very complex. Well, so we're almost out of time here. Go ahead. No. Before I do the wrap up. No, I want to hear.
And then every room's programmed differently when you get to the site. So.
Yes. Well, that's right. I was going to bring up.
So you got 16. We got 16 zones in each room, and in every room it's different.
Right. Right.
So I don't even know the exact specs, right, Coffield, but we're working on a project in Arizona, and they came to us and they said, all right, we want to make changes to all the patient rooms, and there's probably like 150 patient rooms, right? And they're like, can't we just send it out to all the rooms? And Coffield and I kind of looked at each other and we're like, you took the lighting network out for a VE item, right?
Yeah,
And
remember
so now
you wanted to
the
simplify
light,
it.
yeah,
They're not connected.
right? So that the program was just like, what? And he's just like, I got to walk to 150 rooms right now and reprogram every one of these patient rooms. And I mean, you try during design to explain, but they just hear lighting control network and they're like, we don't need that. It's too expensive. And you can, bring them to water, but
Right.
if they decide to take it out, we're not going to fight it, right? Because it can work without it. So what can you do?
Yep.
We try to keep it as long as we can. But
Yeah. And that goes along that argument of education. I mean, there's still a lot of misinformation and just lack of information out there for people to latch on to. So, if you don't have a savvy owner who's part of the conversation, you may have to do ground up education as well. But, well, we're almost out of time. But just want to summarize what we've covered here, because really interesting stuff. As far as Canon is concerned, it's for the most part all under one roof. You sometimes work with other groups that have similar scope capabilities as those in Canon's in-house staff, but for the purposes of the parameters of the project or whatever, you're malleable and you can adapt to that. But when it's an ideal project, you're there from the beginning to the end, even further than a lot of what I would say lighting designers get involved in, because you're there part of the owner project requirements development, and really in that conversation to guide that conversation to say, okay, what do you need? What do you want? Here's, and help facilitate so that when you get to schematic, you can really hit the ground running. And then additionally, because you have this team dedicated to integrations design, you're able to really flesh out all of that integration, whether it's just a tiny little room or it's a whole building automation system. You're really getting into the nitty-gritty and making sure that when it goes to bid, if the contractor's reading those documents, they know they need to include additional work, and they may even need to grab somebody like Ron so that they can be a part of the project. And that's a huge amount of in-house work right there. That I'm imagining includes a lot of unbillable time that is required for in-house maintenance of those documents. So that's a huge add service that you provide as a design firm that not everybody does, which is having this Division 25 specification document that's a living document that's working with the project. And so ultimately, the ideal would be, if all things align correctly, the project gets bid and installed per your specifications, per what the owner wants, and you can fully commission it all the way to the end, which is really phenomenal. I think, a lot of what we talk to on people on this show ask for that kind of service. And so it's really great to hear that that is something that you provide. And would you say that's a good summary of what we discussed here? Did I miss anything?
No, I think that's right on the money. It's in its infant stages, right? So I think that we all get a chance now that, that we've seen for the past, probably, let's just say about 10 years of lighting controls coming to the forefront and becoming more of a system that makes its bid for, the control system that leads the pack in the building. It seems like this is probably the time that we can start to, implement these new changes, which is really exciting. I think if you think about, the things that we can change and efficiencies that we can bring to some of the industries, and actually using technology to make it a smart building versus, something that is just somewhat of like a dream, right? Like we keep saying we're going to do it, but I think we're actually starting to get there. So I think it's really great.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you both so much for joining us. This was a really cool conversation, and hopefully our listeners feel the same way. But just great to have you on here. Thanks so much. What a cool conversation, guys. Rob and Coffield really brought some interesting perspectives to our industry, and hopefully we're going to see these kinds of ideas cropping up more and more in our industry, because it really seems as though integration design and lighting controls design is growing in popularity and the need for a project. So hopefully you got a lot out of it, because I certainly got a lot out of that conversation. Just want to let you know that this podcast is presented by the Lighting Controls Association, or LCA, and financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, or NAILD. And if you haven't checked out our website, please check out our website, lightingcontrolspodcast.com. We've got some great content for you if you haven't checked out our previous episodes, news bulletins, as well as awesome merch on our store, like this t-shirt, this mug, and also what Ron's wearing. Really cool stuff. Thanks so much, everyone.